And now it's time for our inspirational speaker, our own Reverend Philip Falcone.
Thank you, and God bless. Typically when we have a small group, I say, well, I give you the option of having a conversation. But fortunately, that's the direction that we've moved into. And our platform is that of a conversation. And our conversation is going to be, this is the last of the declarations of principle that the spiritualists recite in many of their churches. And it reads, we affirm that the precepts of prophecy contained in the Bible are scientifically proven through mediumship. Now I'm going to go off script because I've got this nice little thing written out about how it's the demonstrations in the Bible and that. But, I personally disagree with this principle because, precepts suggest authority and then of prophecy. Now, the thing about prophecy, well, before I say that, let me ask you, what do you feel prophecy means?
Very simply, to me, it means the foretelling of something that has not occurred yet.
And that's exactly how the dictionary describes it. Foretelling the future, foretelling events. And, when we do our mediumship, when we demonstrate that communication with spirit, we're not always foretelling the future. In fact, they're often pretty vague. Of course, if you read some of the prophecies in the Bible, they're pretty vague too. But the thing about what separates us from the Bible is that the prophecies in the Bible dealt with nations. When you read a prophecy in there, it's about the people of Israel, the nations of Israel. And, clairvoyance, what are your thoughts on clairvoyance? What is that? What might that be?
Clear seeing comes to mind.
Clear seeing. So not necessarily foretelling the future, but seeing it. Such as when Jesus saw one of his disciples, I believe they were beneath a tree having lunch or something, and I could be wrong on that, so don't quote me. But was that a prophecy, or was that just seeing an event? Something to think about, something to consider. Because I've very seldom have I read in there, it might be in the New Testament. I haven't gone through it again. But typically these prophecies, they deal with nations. And I've only read one prophecy, and that was from Isaiah, where he prophesied that a woman, a pregnant woman, would give birth to a child called Emmanuel. And that child turned out to be Jesus, or that's how the stories are written. But, the idea that prophecy is in the Bible it's to me, it's misleading. That happens to be a wonderful collection of quite a number of prophecies, but the idea of prophecy and communication and divination, that's been around long before the Bible was even a glimmer in someone's eye. Divination takes on so much more. And just to give you a pop quiz, what does divination mean, anybody? Or what do you feel it means?
To me, it's seeing or gathering meaning from symbols, or finding symbols in innocuous things like smoke or a cluster of wet tea leaves, whatever it may be.
That's a good start. That's a good start. That's called, I believe, technical divination. And the reason why it's called technical, it's because, and the Mesopotamians were famous for this. They're the ones that brought that to us. They connected strange events with these symbols, as you put it, such as the way the tea grounds are in the bottom of the cup, or a breech birth, and it's somehow it's connected with a particular type of cow and a particular event. So next time they see this type of breech birth, they say, oh, well, this is likely to happen. They're the ones that developed that. What else comes to mind with the term divination?
Well, my definition is simply the connection with the divine. And the technical things you talked about are mechanisms that you use to make the connection. The connection has nothing to do with cards or tea leaves or crystal ball, but it can be a tool to assist one in the process of connecting with the divine. And the divine is a higher source of understanding that is available to us if we connect with it.
Exactly. And that is referred to as natural divination, is when there are no implements involved. And the Greeks were the ones who really fine-tuned this. They had their oracles. I believe the more famous one is the Oracle of Delphi. And people would have these dreams, and dreams are included in the Bible too. We've got Daniel with his dreams in the Old Testament, and then Revelations. I mean, how many of you recall that the book of Revelations is a dream? Because that's how it opens up. A dream. So, but people
Well,
would have these. Go ahead.
I feel a lot better about that book now.
Yeah, incidentally, if you look at Revelations, if you read Revelations as though it were a dream, and you look at the symbols in it, the message there is very much different. And just to give you an example, something that comes to mind, you are neither hot nor cold, therefore I spit you out. You can attach that to a cliche, meaning that you're on the fence. If you're on the fence about it, just forget it. If you have no commitment, you are of no value. And that's what that little bit is saying. If you have no commitment, you have no value, because you either are not for this or against this. You're in between. You have no value. You have no vote.
You're not going to add anything to the conversation.
Exactly. So see how much that changes. So it's just a little sidetrack there to keep in mind. But this idea of the precepts of prophecy contained in the Bible, it's just It's as though, for me, it's as though it dismisses all of that that came before that.
Elaborate on that a little bit. So you're not saying that there's no prophecy in the Bible. You're saying that you don't feel like that precept should point to the Bible?
Well, let me give you this example. Some of the spiritualist organizations, and I believe the First Church of Prayer was one of them at one time, had the principles in their bylaws. So because it's in their bylaws, that limits them to just what's in the Bible. They can only practice those forms of prophecy or mediumship as described in the Bible.
Oh,
So, that last declaration, it narrows it. It's almost as though they're waving a flag and saying, the buck stops here. This is the authority, when it's not. Because, one of the things about these ancient writings, and even a lot of the writings of today, when we read about them, we read about them doing this. It's like Jesus doing the healings. We read about how he healed a man of palsy, or how a woman touched the hem of his robe and was healed. But we don't know how he got there. We're left to our own imagination. Of course, there are these other channeled materials as well that puts Jesus in a different light. But one of the things I notice is Jesus always kept himself amongst the people. He never set himself up above anybody. So based on that, I can only assume that as a man, Jesus learned in the same fashion as I did, as all of you did, by steps. He was taught. He had to understand. He may have had the benefit of certain teachings, such as I believe a lot of people connect him with the Essenes. When the Essenes are very, they're a branch from the Pharisees, if I recall something I read recently. They're an extension of the Pharisees. It's like the Pharisees are is the common thing, and then the Essenes is the more esoteric. And that's something all religions have. All religions have. It's the common religion, and then the esoteric religions and such. But as I was saying here, now, when I read this last principle, the message it gives me is that the Bible is not the textbook as many of them profess. It's the textbook, meaning it's placed much higher and it has a much higher value. Whereas there's so much more that predates it, that gives us a richness. Some of them even give steps on their approach to the divination. In some instances, there were theories about the oracles, the Pythian oracles. Their visions were drug induced. There's that theory. And when we look at the Native American Indians, the shaman were the ones who actually experienced this first. Their records are on the cave walls in France and Portugal, and a lot of the open air etchings in I believe southwestern United States and through Africa. I get the impression I'm drifting here, so questions, comments, direction, thoughts?
Um, I have long defined the Old Testament as the chronicles of the Hebrew people, and I feel like it's important to view that in that context, because it is their story from their perspective. It is their experiences with God as they knew their God, and in their story, like perhaps in all people's stories, the other guys are the bad guys. The other guys are the enemies. The other guys are doing it wrong. The other guys are worshiping a false god. Our prophecies are from God. Yours are from, the dark side. And that theme goes throughout the Old Testament. And for me, it's important to see it in that light, because as I believe the point you're trying to make is that it is much bigger than just the story of one people and their experience with God. For me, that God was too small. I had to embrace a bigger God. And the God that I embrace cares for all of his creation, for all of the human beings that have ever been born, that God offered an interaction in one way or another, in all cultures, in all ways. And the differences primarily are cultural and language and custom, and that there is that rich common heritage, if we look for it, in seeing how each people had their own interaction with God. And I have to agree with you that the Bible is way too small and narrow of a inspired document to be the only source for this. That it's far bigger than just that. And much of what is practiced in Christianity today, I don't see Jesus practicing. The condemnation of pagans, for instance, his interaction with pagan people was never to condemn them in any way. He didn't do that. And that's just one example, and I'll leave it there.
I think that's all very well said. I agree. I agree on all fronts. And I'm glad that you clarified, Reverend Philip. Not that I was disagreeing. I just didn't fully get your point, but I really, upon your elaboration, I wholeheartedly agree too. That I'm not sure if they would think about expanding that principle or not, but yeah.
Well, wasn't that the last principle added? It's one that was added most recently, Philip. Do you know?
Yes, that was the most recent one, and I forget the date when that was added. The National Spiritualist Association is the organization that brought us the declarations of principle, and it began with some proposed principles from the Spiritualist Organization of California. I think it was the State Spiritualist Association of California that originally presented those at, I believe it was the fourth NSA convention. And it was during that convention, there was some discussion. And the president had said something along the lines of, while I'm not open to a creed, this will suffice if I have to follow one. So with that, they developed them. It was they had a Jubilee year, and I believe Jubilee indicates like a 50-year anniversary. And it was a Jubilee year that the spiritualist organizations that came together to promote that and to develop that. Also developed 6 principles of declaration. And it was those 6 principles that eventually, through refinement, became the 6 principles of our declaration. And then the other 2, I believe, would be the Reformation and the moral responsibility. They came a few years afterwards. But if you look at the declarations of principles, when we go through those 6 principles, they're very broad, extremely broad. And it was with the next 2 where they began to narrow the focus. I believe the 6th principle
Do
is,
unto others.
the golden rule, what we call the
Yeah.
golden rule, which is very broad. And then the 7th one is each of us has the moral responsibility. So its focus begins to become narrow. And then the Reformation, the doorway to reformation, that's actually in the Bible. They drew that from the Bible. I forget which letter of Paul's they draw that from, but the Bible verse essentially says that God will never turn his back, or God is waiting for everyone. And it's a loose reference to it. But that little bitty verse, and I almost want to say it's in James, but that little bitty verse there can easily be interpreted as an opening for reincarnation as well. Because if God is patiently awaiting all of us to reach this salvation, whatever it might be, all we have to do is look at our society today, and we realize, this won't happen in one lifetime. Because if that's the case, we have to dismiss so many people, billions of people, those who were caught up in addictions, those who were killed in wars, those who, as infants, or if you want to get even more technical, who died in the womb. I mean, it's a pathway into the idea of reincarnation, but that's not the direction we're going with that. So as they added them in, the focus became narrow, and this was the most narrow one. And to be honest, there was a number of years between the first 6 and the very last one. And part of the discussions for the declarations began when the Spiritualist Organization of California presented their principles at the convention. And there was a lot of talk about the use and the reference towards the idea of God in anything that was remotely connected to Christianity. There was a lot of resistance with that. So when you compare this last principle with the very beginnings, there's a disconnect there, at least in my interpretation.
Well, and I guess I almost wonder whether, sometimes people want to throw in something that has, tie something into the largest practiced religion of the country to try to draw people in, or provide some extra, credibility or something like that. And I don't feel it's necessary, obviously, for me. And I have always been struck by how attached people can be to what they grew up with, even if their logic or their, growth has led them to change their views and beliefs and direction of their thought, and where their spirituality, is now. But I saw that a lot in Unity Church too, where just because they were used to some of the Christian or Catholic, practices and songs or this or that they grew up with, they still wanted to carry them over. And it really wasn't a Christian church. I mean, at its heart, it was open to all different spiritual teachings. But yeah, it's just interesting to me. So whether it's coming from a place of we've always done it this way, or we grew up this way, so that has, credence to us, or whether it's to lend some credibility for people who are attached to the Bible and feel like that's the main source of truth. I'm just curious as to why they inserted the Bible, but
Very good observation, and you make some valid points. Many of those same points I've made when I questioned, why? If we're this, why are we doing this? But you make some valid points and some excellent observations.
And you may have hit the nail on the head.
Yeah. I mean, we're not implying anything derogatory towards any religion, any of them. They are all excellent religions because they all have the same root, which is the continuity of life and be kind to all. So they all have that root. So they are all beneficial.
yeah, but it's like you could insert any book there and it would kind of limit that principle as seen in the Torah, or as talked about in the Quran, or it does say something about who's putting it together.
Reverend Philip had mentioned channeled works, and one of those that was part of the training in the church that I was ordained in was the Aquarian Gospel of Jesus the Christ, and that is a channeled work, and it chronicles the from the birth of Jesus through to his crucifixion, his whole life, including the lost years, from the time he was 12 to 30, those 18 years. And what that chronicles is Jesus being taken to India and to other major civilizations of the time, and he studied the major religions of the world, and basically had the same similar experience of being rejected by the leaders of those religions and chased out. But that that foundation, if you see the Master Jesus in that way, then you have a more inclusive, all world, all religion kind of a view of the message he was presenting. And the message of the Master Jesus is not nearly as narrow as Christianity has made it. And so seeing it in that broad sense agrees with the conclusion that both Reverend Philip and I have come to about it being a universal experience that all men that have ever been born can have. And it's a bigger God than religions, that try to narrow it to our way or the highway kind of a approach.
That reminds me of how Siddhartha Gautama, the original Buddha, said, now don't build a religion around this, don't create special not uniforms, but outfits basically around these teachings. Don't, create rituals around this. And, what does everybody do?
Yep.
This last principle always struck me as awkward and out of place. Just with my resonance, it just like
You
an
could stop.
afterthought.
You could stop with 8 easily.
And you know what? It sounds egotistical to me.
That's a good way of putting it. Like, I'm just like you. Can I play in the sandbox too now?
Yeah. Wait, we're Christian too. It's like,
And incidentally, I don't know if it was now. I have to apologize for this because I often confuse unity with universal. But one of them at that time, I don't know when unity formed, but at that time they had recently put together their own doctrine or creed. And the whole purpose behind that, which was the same purpose that was introduced at that particular convention, was to be like everyone else. So, yeah, Beth, you very good observation there. Very valid point. I think Rachel mentioned something of the same ilk. So yes, very correct.
Well, and sometimes, I've just kind of wondered, because a lot of churches are kind of a business at the end of the day, and you want to draw in as many people as possible. So, some are trying to be as broad in their net as they can, like with unity, I often got the feeling, because they often talked openly about, even in sermons, about how Jesus was a man like all of us. He was just a way shower. So they weren't elevating him to this unattainable spiritual being that is somehow separate from all of us. And but and there was Buddhist teachings or things that would be brought in from different religions, but I think it was always my impression that that a lot of what they kept around of that latch onto Christianity was for the comfort of the masses that have, that's the major religion here. That's what most people have grown up around and with, and so keeping that tie in.
Yeah. Our goal here, at least I hope this is our goal at the First Spiritual Church of Prayer, is one of inclusivity. More than just non-denominational. We presented teachings from a variety of, I don't want to say religions, but a variety of understanding of life or interpretation of life. I know I've brought in the Hermetic principles. And every time I do that, it's changed. Reverend Thomas has brought in the what I think it's the 18 rules of life or something along those lines from Eastern philosophy. I don't recall exactly if that draws from one in particular or a group of them. As well as what rests within the Bible and what rests within other important teachings. Gnosticism, Gnosticism came from the teachings of Jesus. Orthodox Greek, the Orthodox Greek, I'm lost with the rest of that. But again, that came from one of the disciples of Jesus. The Coptics, one of the disciples of Jesus. And those are all, it's all based on their experience of the teachings of Jesus.
To me, the biggest difference with churches like ours is that we appeal to the seeker, the person that's actively seeking, and there's a lot of work involved there. And if someone is hungry and seeking information, they will drink at this fountain. So many of the mainstream churches, it's about being able to have a much simpler path. Just tell me what the formula is. Okay, do A, B, and C. Okay, I'll do A, B, and C, and then I can check the box, and my spiritual life is taken care of, and I go out and do the rest of my time. For the Catholics, it's okay. You got to go to church on Sunday, and okay, check, and we would do that. When I first moved back here, I was going to Catholic church with my parents. Didn't have another place to go, and one Sunday they talked about a men's silent retreat up north of Chicago, and I was like, "Wow, really? They're going to do that?" But the other thing that surprised me is that there was only about 5 or 6 of us that went to that retreat, and went for several years with that group. But they had a harder and harder time till they finally quit doing it, to get anyone interested in going for a weekend retreat, at a Jesuit center. People just aren't interested in putting that much effort necessarily into their spiritual life. So that's one of the differences. We tend to be small groups because it's a very interactive learning experience, study. It's like a study group or something. So
Yeah, I agree. I like that. For me personally, I just think that there's truth in every religion, and there's truth in many philosophies, religious and spiritual philosophies. And if you get attached to any one thing and shut the rest out, then you kind of limit your route to grow. And so it's good that we're open, and we are open to bringing in things from everywhere, as long as it feels true or can grow us.
In Hermetic philosophy, each of those understanding each of those principles is a way of evaluating information and experience. And once you understand one of those, then you see that DNA, if you will, that's in another one is presented by a scientist or a religious person, philosopher, anyone. You can recognize that. That it gives you a way of recognizing someone that understands that principle in the way they have said something, and I see that play out in exactly what we're talking about here, as we come to understand our own spirituality and understand how the divine has works in the world. That when someone is expressing a truth with a capital T, we will recognize it because we have found that truth. And it will show up in all cultures, in all writings, in all places. And the other side of that is that we also can recognize something that doesn't contain that truth, and you know, give things appropriate value for what we take on.
Would anyone like to add something before we wrap this up?
Yeah. So since we're an independent church and an independent association, do we, for our little chapel, have to include this? That last principle?
Well, one of the things that we did when we made the discovery that we were not a legal entity and we formed new bylaws and such is we took those out. That was the first thing we did, is to take them out. And yes, being independent, yes, we can leave that principle out if we choose to post them or choose to recite them again. Yes, we can leave that principle out. So that's the nice thing about being independent. We have options.
That is nice.
So, and as I wrap this up, I just want to say that the Bible in our last principle here, we affirm that the precepts of prophecy contained in the Bible are scientifically proven through mediumship. The Bible demonstrates the methods of mediumship through dreams, through hearing, through seeing, through symbols. It describes a lot of that. Even with the medium of Endor, I believe they rewrote that, so it's no longer the witch of Endor, but the medium of Endor. Even that, they are all demonstrations of mediumship, and that is probably the underlying purpose to this particular principle, is that it describes many phases of mediumship within an acceptable forum. So, and I want to say thank you all for allowing me to share that with you and for participating. It is so much better when there's an exchange of ideas and information that allows all of us to grow.
And not just crickets.
Exactly. Thank you.